We have the great pleasure of hearing from Dr. Steve Frankenieri. Dr. Frankenieri is a professor of psychology at Northwestern University and the director of the Northwestern Cognitive Science program. He received his PhD in 2004 from Harvard University in psychology, cognition, brain, and behavior, and his undergraduate degree from Rutgers in cognitive science and computer science. Now, I asked Steve here today because I think he is a really fantastic example of the true spirit of our cognitive science department, which is integrating multiple different disciplines. Steve is a pioneer in using cognitive science to understand how the brain reasons with and makes decisions with visualizations. In our field, the largest conference in our field is called IEEE Viz. And almost every single year, there is an entire session with 3 or 4 papers that are all co-authored by Steve. So in the field, he is really a pioneer of demonstrating how to integrate hardcore cognitive science in an applied way to understand how to make better visualizations and help people reason with that information. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Steve Frankenieri.
Thank you so much, Lace. That's very kind of you. Screen share working. Maybe a couple thumbs up. All right, I see some nodding. Cool. All right, so today I'm going to talk about some work that we've been doing over the last few years on data visualization and a model of human perception data visualization more generally. Let me start with a little bit of history. So here's where I grew up. This is what I did in grad schools, typical visual neuroscience, studying object perception and feature-based attention and faces and objects and stuff like that. Nothing wrong with that. That's a good thing to study. And if you go to vision sciences, et cetera, these days, this is most of what we'll study. This is vision in the natural world. And for the last 10 years or so, I've made this switch over to studying this weird place, noticing that in that natural image of the berries, you could leverage that visual system to instead show, let's say, a bunch of circles of different colors and sizes. And now you have a scatter plot where you're plotting some variable in X and some variable in Y and some variable in size. And it looks like we've got 2 classes of that variable. And this is where I live now. Try to study how the human visual system has been adapted to pull relationships and statistics and structure out of displays like this instead of the ones on the left. And so this is a relevant skill that you need for all of these STEMmy and high-tech displays on the lower right. So I think this is something that more vision scientists and more cognitive scientists in general it's a world that more of us should be playing in. All right, so how do we pull structure and statistics and other great patterns out of a data visualization? Here's a real one. This is a dashboard that I made the other day for class. This is, if you've ever heard of the epidemiologist and statistician Hans Rosling. This is some of his data about how countries are changing over time in various metrics. And we pull these data up live in class and make visualizations out of them. So how are you all pulling the average color out of the map on the upper left, the shape of the line graphs on the lower left, the number of countries on the lower right, whatever the heck is going on in the upper right? This is too complicated. I can't handle this. I don't know how to even start to approach this problem. I'm going to shrink the problem down to something that I think I can handle. So how about just this? How about just a bar graph? How do we use our visual system to pull patterns and trends, et cetera, out of a bar graph? This still makes me too nervous. Call me in 10 years. I don't think I'm smart enough to figure this out right now. Here's what I can handle at the moment. I can handle, how do we use this visual system that typically evolved and typically develops to process faces and people's and things? How do we use that visual system to pull patterns out of the world's simplest data visualization? That's it. You get 2 values, a big one and a little one. What I want to argue today is that there's at least 3 visual tools that you use in your head to pull patterns and relationships and stats out of the world's simplest bar graph. And this is going to be my fruit fly. So we're going to start with this, show that you've got different ways of pulling information out of it, and then we're going to scale back up to more complex visualizations later on. That's the goal. So So I want to argue today, by the way, interrupt anytime, just unmute yourself and say, Steve, I don't buy that point, whatever you want to say. Or you can pop something in the chat if you like. In theory, I can see that too, but feel free to unmute. I'll go well under time, so we have time to take questions as we go. I want to argue that we have at least 3 visual tools that we bring to bear, even on this really simple 2-bar graph. And that's going to be, number 1, object recognition. You get to look at this thing as a single object with a shape envelope. And when you look at it, I bet you're saying, hey, it's got a slopey roof and it goes down like that. And I bet you can tell that that tells you that there's a descending trend happening there. That's one visual tool you can apply here. Another one's going to be feature distributions. As you look around in the world, you can pull out the statistics about the colors and sizes and orientations of the world around you. And using those same tools and data visualizations will let you see in this simple visualization that there is a bimodality of the sizes of these bars. There's a big one and a small one. And that's useful information when you're looking at this simple graph. Finally, there's a tool that lets you pull arbitrary comparisons out of this simple set of data. You can look at this and you can say, the bar on the left is bigger. The bar on the right is lighter. So there's a bunch of sentences that you can pull from the 2 bars, and I'm going to call that the comparisons tool. Critically, the fast and slow bit on the title of this talk comes from the fact that 2 of these tools work really fast and 1 is slow. The 2 tools on the top, within about 300 milliseconds of this display appearing, you're going to be able to get object recognition shouting slopey roof to the right, and you're going to get feature distributions all being compiled into histograms within that split second. The tool on the bottom, though, is going to be slower. I'm going to argue that in order to make comparisons, you have to move your attention and maybe even your eyes around a scene over time to create these arbitrary sentences, and that those take time, and you can only get maybe a couple of these per second. And if you ask somebody to do a bunch of these on a data display, if you set your display up with a bad design, then it's going to take them a long time to find the patterns that you need. So this is just a preview of the high level. I'm going to go through each of these in detail. All right, so fast, I mean, a couple hundred milliseconds, and on the bottom, we're talking about seconds. All right, so here's a display that should give you a sense of how these tools work. This is going to be a cartoon version of what happens when I open up the back of your head. We have in the middle the window onto the world. This is where the little person that lives in your brain just looks through this little portal. And on the left, we have your object recognition system. I'm going to completely cartoon the object recognition system right now. Like in reality, it's this hierarchical system of increasingly complex features, and constellations of activation in that system creates a giant feature vector that allows you to recognize things that you've seen before. Don't worry about all that stuff today. For the moment, we're just going to light things up on the left when they are match things that we've previously seen. So I'm going to put an image in front of you, and you've got a bunch of berries, and your berry detector is going to be ringing because you got a bunch of features that match, simple to complex features that go with berries. Important part for the system on the left is that it only works for things you've seen before. You have to have long-term memory representations of these objects for this thing to be able to help you out in the real world. So we can apply shape recognition to visualizations, and let's see how that works out for a high school student. So we're going to show that high school student a simple graph. I see some smiles. I think some people know about this example. And you ask the high school student things like, can you give me a real world example of something that would create the data shown in this graph? I will have you note that the y-axis is position and the x-axis is time. So this one is a little bit dangerous. Yes, I will let you come up with an example in your own head for a moment. I will not pop quiz anybody because I got a very famous person to get this totally wrong one time. So I got burned and I'm never going to do that again. Okay, this is an example of a wrong answer. An object rolls along a flat surface and then it rolls down a hill and then it rolls and then it stops. No, that is incorrect. A leading artificial intelligence researcher got this very wrong in front of a bunch of colleagues. And high school students will get this wrong as well. And that's not the right way to look at this. What's happening is that you're activating object recognition, shape recognition, and you're kind of seeing this as a hill and you're doing this little mental animation and you're letting that guide your judgment. And that's not what you're supposed to do here. I feel the same temptation as well. What you're supposed to do here is notice that there's 3 bits to this line. And the top bit, position is not changing, but time is changing. It's an object at rest. Now position and time are both changing. It's an object in motion. Which direction? We actually don't know. And then we have the object at rest again. I hope you feel that these are two really different ways of processing exactly the same graph. One is more shape recognition, and one is a slower process it's going to be the comparison process that we'll talk about later. So just as an intro to object recognition, in some cases, it can get you in trouble where you're noticing that this looks like a ball rolling down a hill, and the fact that this came on so fast that within a split second, it looks like a little hill, that there's a nice little, if you want to link this to the fast and slow in the title, there's a fast process that gave you the wrong answer too quickly, and that winds up confusing these high school students. And in the upper left, if you've got this little 2-bar graph, you could imagine it being useful though, right? You can see that the slope of the roof goes like that, and now you can tell that it's a descending trend really quickly. So that's one example of the object recognition system. Let me move over to feature distributions. We have our window to the world again and object recognition on the left, and on the right, I'm going to put a bunch of feature dimensions. We have size, we have luminance, we have orientation, we have hue. And if I pop up this picture of berries, you'll get that there's berries in the object recognition system, but you're also going to get statistics that there's little berries and that there's bigger berries. There's a bimodality in berry size in that image. You're also going to get information that, ignoring the green leaves in the back, let's just say you're on the foreground right now, there's a lot of red and a lot of blue among those berries. So this is a handy tool for recognizing real world scenes. And now we're going to fade out to that scatter plot again to show that it's going to be exactly the same benefit to looking at this scatter plot, where now it's circles on the left, but hey, there's big ones, there's little ones, there's red ones, and there's blue ones. And that's going to be handy for pulling out an initial global view of what's happening in this data visualization. We have a review paper cited on the bottom right there, where we review the literature on visual statistical extraction and how it can, those visual statistics can be leveraged in real world visualizations. So just to give you an example, we might divide up the ways that you pull statistics in the world into 4 categories. In the paper, we made this up. This is an initial taxonomy. In the paper, we say that this is wrong on purpose, but we have to start somewhere. So this is a starting point for the community to talk about what are the different kinds of stats you might pull from a data visualization. So you might imagine if we plot data's position, you might pull out the mean position of these dots. If I asked you to poke with your finger where the center is of those dots in X and Y, you'd be really good at it. Which one of these is not like the other? You're really good at that. Recognition of a trend. The dots get higher as they go righter. Segmentation or clustering. There's 2 bunches here. You can do the same kind of operations in hue space. So what's the mean color among these? Well, it's going to be a greenish blue. Which one of these is not like the other? That blue one. They get bluer as they go righter. There's a bimodality in hue where they're all blue or all green and nothing in between. The point of this is just that you can do these same operations across different visual channels. Orientation. If I ask you what's the mean orientation of these lines, you can go like this and you'll get it within 15%, because lots of folks in the vision sciences community have asked undergrads to do this 400 times, and they will go like this and you can actually measure it because they're looking to see how well you can pull out statistics in the real world, but actually they happen to be using displays that look more like data visualizations in the real world. Which one of these is not like the other? I see it. As they go righter, they get more vertical. And there's a bimodality in orientations here where they're either vertical or horizontal, but you get nothing in between. Why not? One more. Size. Average size is this much. Which one of these is not like the other? Bigger, righter, bimodality. I think you get the idea. So this paper reviews the literature on the vision side for what tasks people can do with what level of precision, and then tries to compare them to real world visualizations where if you look across, this is semantic text tagging, or this is going to be a complex scatter plot where you have a variable on X and a variable on Y and a variable on size and then a variable on hue. What are the different kinds of patterns that this kind of statistical extraction can support in these real world displays? And this is all work with some data visualization researchers, Daniel Safir, Steve Hurrows, and Michael Gleicher. Actually, I have to thank Michael Gleicher for getting me into this whole area. I heard in around 2011 that there was a researcher up in Madison, Wisconsin, pretty down the road from me, that was working on something called visual comparison. He wanted to know if you look in your phone and you have all these pictures of the same group of people and they're all smiling in different ways, you want to find the best one. How do you find the best one? How do you set up a good display for that? And this is effectively a change blindness task, right? It's the same thing that I grew up studying in Dan Simon's lab in grad school. And so I drove up and we had lunch and then we wrote a grant and then we got it. And now 10 years later, 80% of what our lab is doing is data visualization. So I got to thank Michael Gleicher for that. I'll give you another example of work that we've done with them. Different kinds of visual channels some visual channels like color are better at affording these high-level statistical extractions. So if I plotted your weekly word count production for that paper that you haven't finished yet, or your widget production or something like that, in this format, you'd be mad at me. Because if I ask you, how many words did you pump out on June 25th, you'd say orange? You know, I don't know. I can't really tell there, right? Because it's super imprecise. So we know that that's true about color. So you'd want your data plotted more reasonably in a more precise representation like position. This is like a data viz maxim, you know, plot it in position if you want precision. It's also a tongue twister, as I found out too many times when I teach on that topic. And now if I say, what was your production on June 25th? You'd say, okay, looks like about 60. You're really good at that. What if I ask you another precision question, like there's a day in here where you had the maximum production. What month is it in? Guys, put it in the chat. Let's just get your fingers warmed up. Who's got it? Which month contains the day of single day? Emilio and Carolyn got it first. Very nice. October, cool. Okay, but now let me ask you, these are precision questions. Now let me ask you a high level statistical global holistic question. Which month has the highest production on average? It's not October. We cooked the data, so it's not October on purpose. What do we think? Who's gonna get it? Carolyn's giving up. She's going home. August, very nice. Okay, it's August. Okay, but I think you're gonna believe me if I show you the thing on the top again. Right, now it's really clear. It's actually easier to pull out the stats from this thing on the top for some reason. And this data viz designers know about this. They know that if they want to give you precise information, they give it to you with position, like a line graph or a bar graph or a scatter plot. But if they want you to ignore the details and see the higher level view, look at the big picture, then they'll purposely use color, hue, or luminance to show the data. Can you imagine a topic where you want to show people a lot of data, but you want them to ignore, let's say, little weekly or monthly variations in temperature and look at climate, but from a century view? Designers will use actually color on purpose to hide from you these little dumb seasonal variations that we don't care about and force you to see only the big picture view. So The Economist had this cover in September of 2019 where they wanted you to see that big picture, and they purposely used this, color representation that is less precise but forces you to see that big view and lets you see those high level stats. So the idea is that there's two tools operating here. When I show you a line graph, you're doing something where you're picking out the little peaks and the little values and the little shapes, and it's leveraging this object recognition system. And that's great if you want to pick out the exact value or where's the peak, etc. But if you want to get stats, then it seems like leveraging this system over here is going to give you a better view of the higher level averages. So that is all work again with Mike Gleicher's lab. So that's feature distributions. And just to put the two of these next to each other to give you a little contrast, I'm gonna try this, and we're gonna see if Professor Padilla buys this, right? Let's see if she's up for this. So one might think that object recognition is one of the reasons why we're so bad at doing things like this. If you want to understand what's happening with this hurricane, then you've got this side. You're actually looking at the object as if it has an envelope. At least I'm assuming that everybody knows. I don't have to explain with, okay, cool. All right, so you're looking at the size of this envelope, and then you have to go through these extra steps of understanding what that size difference means, and then think about the statistics. But if you show people these more natural examples that they can pull stats out of, show them a bunch of actual paths, and then let them pull natural statistics like they would in the real world, then they're going to be able to better understand displays like this. You might say the same thing for error bars, right? That on the left, you have to now use shape recognition and now do a bunch of thinking about, well, the percent overlap in these shapes means X, Y, Z. And you have to be a fourth-year grad student to be able to understand what that actually means, as opposed to more natural visualizations like this of odds and probabilities, where you can now look at these as a group of objects and kind of pull stats out of them more easily. And the visualizations on the right are what websites like 538 decided to use this year, because they got burned in 2016 by people not understanding, the sizes of bars next to each other. We actually just had one of the 538 folks in my undergrad class come this week and talk about how in 4 years ago, when you had Hillary with 80% and Trump with 20%, people misconceived that 80 beats 20. An army of 80 beats an army of 20. So therefore Hillary is 100% sure to win. And they got really burned. So there's a great article that they have on their website. I can put it in the chat later if you want, where they talk about all the design iterations that they went through to make sure that that uncertainty got properly conveyed this time. In fact, 5e Fox, if you'll notice on the website, is constantly reminding you that the underdog could win, because they know that if they get burned twice, that no one's going to pay attention to their predictions anymore. I need a volunteer for a magic trick. Who's up? Come on, just unmute yourself.
I'll do it.
Thank you, Helia. Is it Helia?
Yes.
All you have to do is you're going to pick a card. Keep it to yourself. Don't tell anybody, okay? Everyone else play the home game. Just pick one card. Okay, so Helia, I'm going to show you a bunch of cards. I'm going to give you like 3 seconds. Pick one. Don't forget it. Ready? Okay. Here we go. Go for it. Got it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm going to take away only your card. Ready? Magic. Did I get it? It's amazing. Just nod and just pretend that it worked. Don't worry about it.
Yes, yes, you got it.
Okay. Cool. This is a really old trick. 30% of you probably know it. It's called the princess card trick. But the point of it, the reason why I want to show it is because the trick relies on visual statistics. Helia, thank you very much for being our involuntary volunteer there. Let me show you now how it works.
Thank you for having me.
So the way that the card trick works is that you show these cards and you pick one, and then all of the cards are different, right? But you don't notice because statistically they all kind of have the same suits and colors and stuff like that. So I want to show you this because I think it's a nice example of how your visual system tricks you into thinking that you're seeing the world in a detailed way. But really what you're doing is you're relying on the combination of these two systems, object recognition on the left and statistics on the right, but in a kind of a superficial way where you can get tricked if there's a new combination of things. So if you look at the first display of cards, you know that there's Jack, King, Queen, you know that there's the 4 suits, you know that there's red, you know that there's blue. And if that's the only representation in your head, then when I change them all, notice that I changed all of the cards. None of these cards were present in the last display. The statistics are identical. And that's why this trick works. Because if you don't actually see the cards and you only have these statistics, you can't tell the difference between these two sets. So a lot of work in the visual cognition world in the last 20 years has shown that these types of statistics are supporting an illusion of detail in the world around you, and you're not actually as good at picking out the details, and particularly of combinations of objects, of knowing that that card was specifically the queen of diamonds and it was red, etc. You're actually just getting the stats, and you don't get you only get the details for maybe one card at a time. We can have an argument about it's 1, 2, or 3, but at least in a stressful situation where I was moving my spirit fingers, then you only get one here, right? So in this case, you really have to focus attention just on the one card. And when you do, just pretend that you're blocking away the rest of the cards, you are getting that it's red and that it's queen and that it's a diamond. So Helia, I'm not sure if that was the one that you chose, right? But whatever one you chose, you are getting just the stats for that. And that's how you remember that one card. And that's why you don't notice that all the other cards changed as well. So this is just a demo of how much these statistics do for visual processing in general. So that's going to be important when we come here to comparisons, because now let's go back to the real world. Comparisons are really, really slow and really, really limited. Most of vision is going to be supported by this process, by this system here and this system here. And just as Helia could only get one card at a time, I think that you only get one comparison out of a scene or out of a data visualization at a time. So this is all work that I think I owe a huge debt to Irv Biederman and John Hummel. They pioneered a lot of work on this topic. And if we have this image of these berries over here, we know that there's berries, we know that there's little ones, we know that there's big ones, we know that there's blue ones, we know that there's red ones. Cool. But take away the picture. Were the blue ones big or small? Were the red ones big or small? Don't think about the picture. The picture is gone. That information is completely missing from the rest of the dashboard in your brain, right? This and this together cannot provide you with that information. So the way that you can get that, though, is to do the same thing that Helia did when she picked out that one card, is just to isolate a smaller subset of the scene. So let's just isolate two. Well, actually, that's not enough because you still know that there's two sizes and you still know that there's two colors. Was it this or was it this? We can't tell, right? So one way to do this, I'm going to put Helia's percept down here on the bottom. Sorry, you didn't know you were going to be an example for like 5 whole minutes, did you? So if you look at both of these at the same time, you know that there's berries, you know there's blue, you know there's red, but I'm going to claim that it's only when you move your attention to the blue one. Inhibit the red one. Look through the world through a paper towel tube and only look at the blue one. This is what attention does, right? It's gonna turn up the gain on this area of the visual field. And it's gonna turn down the gain on this bit. Now you know that the blue one is the one on the left, and the blue one is the bigger one, right? We also notice that this activation went up here, so we know that the blue one's bigger. Maybe you also know that you just moved your attention to the left. That'll be easy to know. Little motion detector in your brain tells you just looked left or moved your attention to the left. And that tells you that the blue berry is on the left. And now I'm going to move my little spotlight to the right. Cool, look what happened. Now it's small, it's red, it's still a berry. I move to the right, got it. Small red berry on the right. So this should be this is a claim of how spatial relations work in vision in general. And this is all in a 2012 paper that I can send around. But I think it's really important for data visualizations because these kinds of relations are the heart of all data visualizations and actually maps, graphs, and diagrams more generally. And the claim is that for me to know that, on my screen right now, that Michael is to the left of David, I don't know where they are on your screen, or that David is to the right of Michael, what I have to do is move my eyes to Michael and I move left and Michael's on the left. And then I move my eyes to the right and I see David and then I know that David's on the right. And this should sound crazy because you look at it and you don't feel like you're doing that, but that's how I'm going to claim that you're pulling arbitrary spatial relationships out of the world. I mean, if we sat here all day and I got perceptual learning, I'd eventually form a little template of Michael's to the lefts of David's, given, the kinds of statistics and like a little spatial template, but hopefully this talk won't take that long, right? And it would take like a week to do that. But for these arbitrary real-time spatial relations, that's how I'm going to claim that you're going to do it. And other people, I'm not going to say that that's a unique claim. Other people say something similar. Here is some work from Linda Smith's lab where they want to figure out how little kids learn how to represent numbers. And you got multi-digit numbers. And in order to represent the number 124, you can't have a little template in object recognition for 124. You have to separately be able to recognize each of those numbers. And don't worry about all the stuff on the top. Just notice that on the bottom, there's a little gray spotlight that is acting just like the little yellow spotlight in my previous displays. What this network is doing, and actually implement it in a little neural network, is it's a event, you can look at the number holistically, there's a 1, 2, or a 4, but you don't know what the place values are. And you actually have to go to the first place value and go to these things one at a time in order to pull out the structure to know which number is where. It's a similar claim to those. So back to our data visualization. We just go down to 2 berries. I'm going to make this even simpler. I'm going to make this start to look more like a data visualization instead of berries. Let's just make this 2 colors. All right, we got squares, we got blue, we got red. Cool. But I don't know if I just pay attention to both, whether I'm looking at blue, red, or red, blue. I don't know which one is to the left or which one is to the right. My receptive fields for these colors are big, so I don't know which one is where. So I'm going to claim that what you do is you just isolate the blue. Okay, blue's on the left. And now you move to the right. I moved right. I'm looking at red. So red must be on the right. And that's the way you're pulling out the relation. If that's true, oh, by the way, this is not that crazy when you think about language. So one cool thing about this is that it suggests that blue left of red is one perceptual moment. And then red right of blue is another separate perceptual moment. These are asymmetric. And when I say that, it feels weird. And actually, the first time I mentioned this mechanism to Irv Biederman back in 2012, he said, Steve, that's a cute idea, but you've got a big problem. And that is that relations aren't symmetric. They're asymmetric. It's different to know this than to know this. And it was at a conference, and I went back to my hotel room and I cried my eyes out all night because I was so sad. And then I woke up the next morning and I said, you know what? It's a good thing. That's parsimonious. That's falsifiable. That's a strong claim. I like this. And then I went back and he said, okay, good job, kid. And it was good. It was like a good moment for me. Anyway, language does the same thing, right? If we say blue left of red is not the same sentence as red right of blue, it's a different sentence, right? And it doesn't feel that different, but if I say a sentence like, and those of you that know like Miller and Johnson, Laird and Lila Gleitman's work, this will sound familiar, but if I say something like, I went to a party last week and I met Kamala Harris, you'd be like, oh, that's great, Steve, congrats. But then if I said, I went to a party last week and Kamala Harris met me, you'd say, it's the same, in theory, that's the same sentence, right? But the second one is like, no, you're a jerk, right? There's something different about that sentence. So, and there's a lot of work in psycholinguistics showing that those are really psychologically different. So what we're saying is that in vision, they're also psychologically different. And if you think this sounds crazy, that you don't just recognize this in one shot and you have to do something, this little attentional movement that takes time, then, it takes you 300 milliseconds, I'd say you don't feel it. So let me make you do 10 of them at once. Which one of these is not like the other? Boom and boom. I bet you felt that took you, you had to do something, right? That wasn't immediate. You can't just zoom out and look at all of these at once and actually get that information. So I'm claiming that you have to go do something that feels like this. And this is a really hard visual search task. This is the hardest visuals. This kind of search, these spatial relationships, are the most robustly hard visual search tasks that exists. Jeremy Wolf, Mr. Visual Search, had a paper called What Can a Million Trials of Visual Search Tell You, maybe 10 years ago. And one of the results was that this is this is robustly hard when you ask people for relative spatial configurations. In case you missed it. So, oh, by the way, it's not about perceiving color in the periphery, because which one of these is not like the other? No problem. But now if I give you another one, which one of these is not like the other? Go ahead, point. Go ahead. There we go. There we go. Right, it's hard. So I'd say this is going to be true for left, right, for up, down, etc. For any of the ways that we wind up taking information and cramming it into spatial structure, phylogenetic trees, maps, graphs, diagrams, electrical circuits, etc. In all these cases, we're taking structure in some other domain and we're cramming it into this kind of spatial structure. And I think so it's important to understand this mechanism to be able to get people to be better at any of these tasks. Let me get back to our graph, our buddy. I miss our fruit fly. We haven't visited our fruit fly in a while. And I'm going to make the same claim here, that in order to tell whether you're looking at big, small versus small, big, you don't get it from this view. You get that there's a bimodality. There's a little one and a big one, but you don't get where there's big, little, big until you shift your attention over here to the big one, or you shift your attention to the right to the little one. And that signal, I moved left and I'm on the big one, that's how you get it. And if this feels like you can do it more quickly than that, let's play which one of these is not like the other. And I think you'll feel this is a little easier than the red-blue one. You'll see why there's a little shape trick you're kind of doing. There's a little holistic shape trick you're doing on this one. But I think you're feeling that it still is a little harder than you would have expected. And the claim again is that what you're doing is ripping out a signal like this over time. So let's do an experiment. Let's show people an image like this. And let's say, do you see big, small, or small, big? And let's show that they move their eyes around in that decision because they have to. And your answer to that should be, congrats. You're going to show that you show people pictures and they move their eyes around, right? Thank you, reviewer 2, for pointing out that that is a dumb experiment. Okay, but we're going to have a control condition where we're going to show exactly the same screen, this or this, but we're going to ask you instead, are these two the same size or a different size? Claim now is that you can just look at this little histogram and you can tell whether it's unimodal or bimodal. And in fact, it should be easier. You should be encouraged to keep just a single global scope and keep your eyes just locked in the middle. So that's going to be the experiment that we're going to do. And this is all work from a former postdoc in the lab, Audrey Michael. So Audrey would start you with your eyes in the middle of these two objects. Actually, there were some more objects. Your decision could be between multiple of these, but just for simplicity, let's just pretend that there's two. because it's hard to judge an eye movement from here to here. You know, is this are you looking at the fourth one or the third one? It's in the middle. It's hard to tell. It's easier to tell when you're just ballistically making a vector left or right. So we're just going to look at those trials for today. And the goal, and what we're going to do is look to see whether you, in the decision big, small, or small, big, whether you tend to move your eyes towards one of these objects. And then we're going to have the control condition, exactly the same display. And here we're going to predict that you're going to look at these holistically and you're going to keep your eyes in the center. Critically, this condition, half of the displays, the two sizes were the same. We throw those out because we want to make sure that you're still looking at a display that's exactly the same as the one in the relation condition. So here's the data. Here's looks towards the taller bar and looks towards the shorter bar. So, you know, you can have a display like this, tall, short, or short, tall, and we're going to take the data and we're going to fold. I don't know what it looks like from your perspective. We're going to fold it so that it matches that. There's some left-right looking stuff, but it's more complicated. So I'm just going to show you the look toward the tall or toward the short bar for today. And we're going to take the same different task, the control, where we expect people to look in the middle. And here's their eye movements. There are no eye movements, right? They basically park it in the center, and it takes about 600 milliseconds for them to press the button to answer the question. And this is where their eyes are. They only make one or two fixations. It doesn't matter which one you measure. Their eyes are basically in the center. I'm going to spread them out vertically just so you can see them a little bit better. And now I'm going to show you the same people with the same displays, but now in a relational task. Is it small, big, or big, small? And I think you can see that they now tend to pick off either the small one or the big one. I'm going to put these little barbells to show you these are each individual subject. And just to show you the distributions of these fixations a little better, I'm going to drop them down into a histogram. So they're all going to pop down here. And I think you can see most people like to look at the tall bar. Few people are weird and they like to look at the small bar. I mean, it doesn't matter, right? It's an idiosyncratic strategy. And that's why we have to use eye tracking to be able to get data on every trial to see, but people tend to commit to one side or the other. There's a couple people in here that don't really make systematic eye movements. If you go to look at the left-right data, you know, 2 out of the 4 of them are going to systematically just look left or systematically just look right. The other 2 out of the 4 don't make any eye movements. They're just staring at this at the center. I have to claim that they're secretly making attention movements. Have to, right? And we do other work with ERP where you can look at the lateralized attention components where you're keeping fixating, and you can look at the signal in the back of the head to see whether people are moving their attention left or right. And in those experiments, we find that people do look left and right. And so you can even without an eye tracker, you can track this from signals. ERP folks who know signals like N2PC or CDA, you can use those to measure those signals. Okay, so the claim here is that here you're using a comparison tool, and that's why you have to pick off one at a time. And here you're using this histogram tool, and that's why you don't have to pick one off. You can look holistically and get the answer. Some of you are noticing, hey, I can use the shape tool. I can just look and see, like, what's the slope of the roof of this thing? I can cheat. And I think you're right. So we replicated this experiment. Same conditions, everything was exactly the same, except in this condition right here, we changed what was drawn on the keys. So we didn't want to use language in any of this. We didn't want to say big, small, because that might make you look left and right because you're following the bouncing ball of language. Everything was like, press this picture if it looks like this. So there's literally a picture on the keyboard. So we peeled those stickers off and instead put on stickers that look like this. Does the roof of the house slope this way or slope that way? Otherwise, everything is exactly the same. And now we're going to predict that if you're using shape recognition, you don't need to move your eyes around anymore. You should keep them locked in the center, and the data turned to this. So it seems like that now you're using the shape tool, even though the task is exactly the same. So this is same display, actually same relational decision, but you're able to look at the shape envelope instead of making this more linguistic sentence by looking through the 2 over time. So those are the 3 tools: object recognition, feature distributions, and comparisons. And I just want to give you a quick bit of practical advice that comes out of this, or at least an explanation for practical advice that's already out there in the design literature. If you have a bar graph and you show this to someone who makes data dashboards, like something that someone in an organization or a business uses to look at, here's our budget last year and here's what we spent this year. Or in this case, I'm going to give you student A and student B both took an ACT test prep course. Student A got worse and student B got better. You're doing 2 comparisons there. And no big deal, you can do it quickly. Overall, this course doesn't seem to work very well. Let me get some more data. Okay, a little more data that this course is working well, but let me give you some real size data, right? When you look at this, is this course worth it? Does it work on average? And I think what you feel is you start going through saying, okay, this one compared to this one. And by the time you get to the fourth set of bars, first of all, 2 seconds have gone by and you're getting annoyed. And second of all, your working memory limit starts to kick in. And by the time you get over to here, you've forgotten what you've gotten over here. Or at best, you have some summary of the number of times that red beat blue. Or maybe you'll start cheating and looking, just trying to isolate all the blue bars and look at what they are on average, and then isolate all the red bars and look at what they are on average. So there's little tricks you start using. So this is the comparison tool being slow. And a professional dashboard designer will say, I need you to directly depict your deltas. Your problem is that your deltas are not directly depicted. They love using that phrase. So they will do this. And they will just use Excel or whatever software to subtract out the comparisons, the deltas between this, right? This gap turns into this. And now I think you can instantly tell, I look at the whole thing, use a feature statistics tool, and you can say, that's the biggest rise, that's the biggest drop, that's the range, that's the average. You're able to pull stats out of this thing much more quickly. So we have a paper in the Viz, all from our former PhD student, Christine Nadelfer, showing that this stuff on the bottom is just robustly hard. And that as soon as you turn the task into this one, which the designers have already figured out without necessarily knowing why, then the task becomes just, it doesn't matter how many things you ask people to do, they can do it instantly. With some interesting exceptions, because people do figure out dirty tricks on the one on the bottom, like what's the average of all the blues and what's the average of all the reds. There's some dirty tricks that you can do if you really want to beat the system, but you're not doing true comparisons. So that's a comparison of those tools. I'm going to redeem object recognition for a second. Remember when object recognition led us astray by being super fast and then made us see a ball rolling down a hill? Object recognition is mad at me right now. I want to redeem it because I need it. I need it to be an expert in graph comprehension. When I look at a graph like this and I want to appreciate the seasonal interaction between the terrible climate in Chicago and the wonderful climate in Sydney, I can see the main effect that Sydney's warmer and I probably want to live there, but there's an interesting interaction here, right, where the seasons are all reversed. It's easier for me to see it in this version of this graph because just like you all have memorized, this is an interaction as soon as you see an X. In fact, most of you, when you see an interaction that goes like this, you will worry because now this line and this line are on different scales, and you like this interaction, the crossover, and that makes you happier because it's more reliable, et cetera. So that kind of object recognition is really useful in graph comprehension. And Steve Coslin pointed this out in some books on the perception of graphs and back in the late 90s. But I think that object recognition and shape perception has an even bigger future as a research question in data visualization. And to show you that, I'm going to inch from my fruit fly back up to this more complicated graph. I'm starting to sweat, but what the heck, let's get wild and let's look at like a real graph and think about how we perceive the shape in that real graph now. So these are stock data. And when you look at this, what do you actually get and what do you not? I feel like I see a peak up here and there's a valley and there's like a texture. If I were to design a demo, here's what I want. I want to go to the DataViz conference in 2 years and I want to give them a demo where I say, look at this graph, take it away. I just made a giant change. What is it? Okay, there's no change. This is a false alarm if you said change. It's exactly the same, but I want to have that demo where I make a huge change to it, but I have such a good model of how you perceive that shape, of what the shape space is in your head for this graph, that I can make huge changes to this thing and you won't even notice. That'll be massively practically useful because you can build it into data visualization software and it'll predict what people are going to notice, what they won't. We got the new data in and this bump went up. We should really flag that, but don't worry about flagging that because people will notice that. It'll be a great tool to have in some of the software. So how would we build a model of what you see and what you don't see in the shape? Well, we can look to the shape recognition literature that exists in the vision world, and they like to use objects like this, and they like to do, convex silhouettes is the main toy problem for that world. And what do we know from that literature? Well, people look at minimum of curvature and break things into pieces, and then each of those pieces gets sort of a qualitative description of being sharp or extrudy, et cetera. So we could steal from that, and we could say, all right, we could look at this line, and we could say those are the major minima of curvature. And then you can imagine some qualitative description where this tends to go be a flat line. So I'm going to give it a 0. And then this is like maybe a convex thing. And it's got a right skew. I don't know, some little abstract description. And there's some texture overlaid on it. Now, I bet if you change the texture here, I wouldn't notice. Maybe if you touch the peak, right? Because the peak is salient. But otherwise, I bet I wouldn't notice if you mess with the texture, as long as you gave it the same frequencies, the same, Fourier statistics. And then you can imagine I get the same thing for each one of these little segments. And this is one primitive starter model for the initial 200 millisecond glance of me looking at this line graph. And then I bet that if I move my eyes over here and ignored the rest of it, I bet that I would get more of a detailed view of this one. Oh, there's a bump there now. Oh, there's another split here. So I bet you could recursively apply this model to just this right quarter of the shape. This is something, this is a grant proposal I want to write up. I don't know enough machine learning and Bayesian shape skeletons to actually execute this. So I'm looking for collaborators at some point. Hint, hint, if anybody knows that stuff. But I think this would be a really cool translational problem to attack that would lead to some great practical tools for data visualization and would be just a fun project. One more topic, and then I'll review and look forward to questions. The last one is if we have a good sense of how these tools work, why are data visualizations often really, really terrible? If there's a lot of advice out there about how to make a good visualization, but I don't know how many I see a lot of student presentations and they'll put data up or presentations at conferences where I just get overwhelmed and I don't know what's happening. And I want to show you one of my favorite slides. This is what happens if you go to Google image search and you put in world's worst slide or horrible slide, and you get this. Hide your cat, right? Shield the eyes of your children. It's not that bad, right? This is not the world's, I've seen way worse. But this is like, it's just the bottom quartile. And so why does this happen? Why do people make these? Why do they think that I'm going to have any idea what's happening here? And I think what's happening is that there's a curse of expertise. There's a curse of knowledge. That you have these little tools in your head that you can manipulate the way that you're seeing an image, right? This guy that made this, here's the guy that made this. This guy that made this looks at bullet point number 2, and he knows that that's supported by the fact that the purple-green ratio here is bigger than the purple-green ratio here. That's not what supports it. I'm making that up. But you get the idea. He's using the tools in his head for seeing the visualization in a different way, these comparison and statistics tools, et cetera, to be able to see this from his perspective. And once he's got it, he thinks that it's clear because it's clear to him. And then he shows it to his analyst colleagues and they're like, Carl, what are you talking about? I don't know what's happening here. And the way to get around this, and we wanted to, by the way, replicate this in the lab, this effect of somebody gets used to seeing a visualization and they think that it's clear to other people. They think that other people will see what they see, but they just don't. So here's oh, by the way, let's see. Yeah, I got to show you this part. The reason why this probably happens is because once you use the tools and you set up and you see the visualization a certain way and you have your tools tweaked, it really does change what you see. Carl over here really does, when he reads bullet point number 2, that relationship really pops for him and he really believes that other people will see it as well, because that's what's in his head. And when you have something like a data visualization that you can interpret in multiple ways, and you start to move around those little sliders in your head to see it in different ways, it really does change the image in front of you. So I'm going to take this little, this little mixing board analogy. And when you look at this face and you want to see the face, you really are amping up the gain on some aspect, maybe it's the dark color here. When you see this berry image and you pay attention to the red berries or the blueberries, you really are turning up the gain. If we were allowed to record with an electrode from your primary visual cortex, we would find that the image looks more like this, right? You're amplifying the blue, or then when you look at the red, you're amplifying the red. So it really does look different, and it's hard to imagine that for other people, it doesn't look like that. This is actually why when you see that video with the basketball players, if anybody hasn't seen this, turn off go run away for 20 seconds and come back. But I think 99% of you know this, that, when you watch this video, you're supposed to pay attention to the team in white shirts, which causes you to turn up the gain on the lighter signals in the display. And then what you don't notice is that a few seconds later, the gorilla has walked into the scene. That's because you're inhibiting the dark areas of the screen and you're amplifying the white areas. Okay, so the idea is that the reason why people make data visualizations like this is that some areas of the scene that they know are important and they stared at a lot just become more salient, and they feel like their audience will see them as more salient too. So Cindy, a PhD student in the lab, who's heading off to a computer science job next year. She's going to be at UMass Amherst in the computer science department. Wanted to simulate this in the lab. And so what she did is she told you this juicy story about the top two lines. Hey, look at this mythical European country. Look at these deliciously European party names, Labor, Conservatives. There was an election and these are polling data. And who cares about the folks at the bottom? I mean, we want to know who's going to win. We want to know about this green and this blue line. So they had a debate, and the green person who was winning made this big mistake, insulted the intelligence of the spouse of the blue person. Not cool. And you can see how their fortunes converge a bit. And then people got bored of that scandal. And then the blue person tried to answer a question in a later debate, didn't have an answer, tried to bring up that stale old scandal again. That looked weak. Okay, and then you can see their fortunes diverge. All right, now you have some insight. Now you know what's going on here. The top two lines are shiny to you in your head. You're turning up the gain on those. Wait a minute, sorry, wrong experiment. Oh no, we messed up. Forget everything I told you. Just ignore all that. See this graph? This is, the boxes are gone, everything's full color, etc. We're gonna grab somebody from out in the hall that doesn't know that story, and we're gonna ask them to predict the most interesting, the most salient areas of this graph. Again, forget everything that you just saw. What do you think they're gonna draw? And Carolyn's gonna draw that, and Adolfo's gonna draw that, and everybody together is gonna draw all that. So you think that other people are gonna find the same thing shiny that you find shiny. Okay, I see a reviewer two in the audience saying maybe the top two lines just are more shiny. I mean, they're the top two, right? They could just be more objectively salient. Maybe they're right. So of course you flip a coin when people come in the lab, and you could also tell them exactly the same story about the bottom two lines. And now you give exactly the same graph. These two graphs are the same. And now you say, forget everything we told you. And now they draw this. So this is just a empirical demonstration of the curse of expertise, the curse of knowledge. Once you start using your visual tools to see a scene, to see a data visualization in a certain way, you predict that other people are going to see it the same way that you do. Practical tip number 2, by the way, first of all, if you want to have good data visualizations, go read all these outlets: New York Times Upshot, Washington Post Graphics, 538. These are the world's experts at communicating data-based evidence clearly and engagingly. We reach out to them and bring them in for talks and collaborate with them and A/B test their ideas, particularly the New York Times Upshot. I think they are, if you were to pick one, they're the single best outlet in the world for communicating data clearly to other people. And let me show you what they're going to do to defeat this curse of expertise. I'm going to give you a bad data visualization and then time you and how long it takes you to figure it out. Ready? So I'm going to give you a little bit of text and a graph. I'm going to time you with my invisible stopwatch and try to figure out how long it takes you to integrate the text and the graph and verify that the text matches the graph and kind of understand how they go together. All right, be honest, give a little, clap or a thumbs up or a something or a harumph whenever you get it. Go. All right, I'm going to call it there. I saw a couple fingers. This typically takes like 15 seconds, 15 or even 20 seconds, because I'm making you do a lot of work. You have to read the text. You have to go down and find what 2008 is 2008. Okay, 8%. Where's 8%? Okay, 2011. Where is that? Okay, so first of all, there's a lot of this going on. And the second thing that you have to do that's bad is you have to do a lot of painting in your mind. And you have to say, okay, 8%, okay, area under the curve, etc. So the data journalists are going to fix these two things. They realize that this is an ambiguous figure, and they're making you do a lot of work in seeing like the duck or the rabbit in this figure, right? That there's multiple ways you can view this thing, and that you're doing a lot of work trying to figure out how you should see it. So what the data journalist is going to do, and also what good textbook designers do in the education diagrams world, is to really help you see it in the right way. They're going to give you these cues to let you see it the way that you should see it. So I'm going to now time you with my invisible stopwatch again, where what they're going to do two things. They're going to move the text down. Instead of making you figure out what text goes with which section, they're going to put it right next to the pattern that it describes. And then they're going to do the mental imagery painting for you instead of asking you to do it. Here we go. Boom. 3, 4, 5, Everybody's got it, right? I'm imagining. This is much easier to understand now that the relevant text is next to the patterns that it described, and it's showing you the patterns that you should be imagining. So this is what good data presenters do. And I'd say talks and posters use this. It turns these 15, 20 second understanding times to 5 seconds. And it really helps if you use it over and over again. I've seen great presenters use this. The other thing you can do if you're live, someday we'll be back to live presentations, we'll see, is to do what this guy Hans Rosling does. If you haven't seen this, go Google Hans Rosling, best stats ever. And he uses language and gesture to make sure that you see what he sees. He's got this 2005 Excel looking display. It's complicated data. It's moving. It's hard to understand, but he knows that it's hard to understand. And he keeps using gestures to say, look at this group of objects. It moves up. Look at that one. It moves left. So he's doing the language and gesture equivalent of my painted annotation to make sure that you see the same story that he does in the data. How are we going to help Carl then? Okay, it'd be great if Carl got some critique, a little bit of training in basic, data viz from practitioners that are good at this kind of stuff. It'd be good if he could get his colleagues to do critique. That's hard. So it'd be nice if we could just replace these colleagues with like some robots on the internet that would do the critique for him. And we've got a project that we're putting in a grant for in a couple months on creating a deep neural network that simulates the way that people understand and perceive data visualizations. Don't try to understand any stuff on the right. If you happen to do deep neural network work, you'll see some of those boxes on the labels and you'll see how the system works. But if not, the main point is that the tools that I'm describing on the lower left are going to be really important components of how this network that's going to simulate how people look at graphs is going to work. And hopefully we'll have a website up where you can put your visualization in. It'll tell you what kinds of patterns people will typically see, and then have some sort of an auto-tune button that'll help other people, that'll help your visualization afford those patterns more effectively. Yeah, to summarize, there's many ways to see a single visualization. Hope you agree, and people are bad at predicting what others are going to see. So practical tip, try to disambiguate your visualization so that other people will see the same thing that you see, just as a little practical tip. Otherwise, 3 main tools that I want to argue are used in your head for unpacking data that has been translated into a visual image: object recognition, feature distributions, and comparisons. Fast, fast, slow. Object recognition is a little dangerous for novices, ball rolling down a hill example, but critical for experts. That's how I see interactions. Feature distributions. The data viz community used to really think about this kind of statistical extraction as just pop out, like, oh, just see that one point that's an outlier, that one point that's a different color. And a lot of the work in the last 5 years has brought to them this idea that it's more powerful than that, that you can use visual statistics to do real statistics, that get averages and get ranges, et cetera, in your data. And there's still needs to be a lot more work that quantifies what we're good at, how precise can you get this average, where might you be biased, et cetera. Finally, there's comparisons. This is when you break up a visualization into pieces and you move through it over time to create these pseudo-linguistic sentences. And that's flexible and you can recognize arbitrary patterns, but it's slow and it takes time. So if you need powerful data extraction, this isn't necessarily the right tool for you. Then raising some open questions. One is for this object recognition, shape envelope understanding, et cetera. It'd be great to have a model of how that worked. It'd be great to know what people will notice and what they won't. For feature distributions, exciting area of research here is the kind of stuff that that LACE works on, where you try to show people uncertainty with either spatially separated examples that are more like the real world experience of seeing a bunch of objects, or temporally separated examples where you can imagine showing this hurricane path one at a time like that, and you're summing up these statistics in this more naturalistic way over time. Finally, this comparison mechanism, I think an open question is, this is a bit of a crazy idea that you pull relations out of the world by serially moving your eyes and your attention around. I think it is something that is working its way into other models, like that number recognition model from Linda Smith's lab. And it's something that is becoming increasingly important in deep neural network models in general. natural language processing models, models that understand visual scenes in human-like ways are using these kinds of attention mechanisms that work pretty much like this. This is the way that they are able to be combinatorial and compositional and get away from the more template or feature vector representations like these, and are able to pull out arbitrary structure from images or sentences. So I think that's an exciting development, that literature is using that tool. Take a moment to thank all the labbies and all the people that pay for stuff. And I will leave up this slide for questions. And Lacey, you have a link to this in case people go to breakout rooms or something, and this would be handy. But otherwise, thanks.